The shift ended at 6. Marcus signed out at the Meridian Services Station on the ground floor of Harrington Tower, logged his hours in the system with the same attention he brought to all documentation, and exchanged the brief professional nod that he and Tony the security guard had developed over 8 months as their preferred form of goodbye. Tony was a man of few words, and Marcus had learned to appreciate this. The overnight had its own social grammar, and unnecessary words at 6 in the morning were a violation of it. He pushed through the service entrance into the Portland morning. November had committed to itself overnight. The cold had the particular edge of a season that was done transitioning and had arrived at what it actually was, the kind of cold that found the gaps in your jacket and was specific about it. His breath came out in a brief cloud. He turned up his collar and started walking to the van, which was in the lot on Crane Street, 6 blocks from the tower. He didn't hear footsteps behind him. He wasn't listening for them. He was thinking about Chloe, about the spelling test she'd mentioned at dinner, and about whether he'd drilled her enough on the 3 words she'd been getting wrong, and about the napkin drawing he'd done last night at the kitchen table, a small compass rose. Because she'd asked him what sailors used before GPS, and he'd told her, and she'd been fascinated by the idea of navigation as something you could hold in your hand. He was thinking about the compass rose when his phone buzzed. His sister Nadia, a text. Chloe up early, asking about breakfast. All good, just letting you know. He typed back, thank you. Home by 7. Tell her eggs. Chloe had opinions about breakfast that were specific and consistent, and he'd learned which mornings warranted which options. Today was an eggs morning. He knew this the way he knew the sock drawer contents and the bedtime water glass and the position of Gerald the rabbit relative to the pillow. From sustained attention, from the accumulation of small specific knowledge that was the actual substance of loving someone who depended on you. He reached the van, unlocked it, put his bag on the passenger seat. Behind him, at a distance she'd been maintaining for 6 blocks, Josephine Reeves stopped walking. She was not dressed for surveillance. She was dressed for a board meeting that started at 8, which meant the charcoal blazer and the black trousers and the coat that was good quality and warm. Which was fortunate because she'd been standing outside Harrington Tower since 5:50, waiting for the service entrance to produce Marcus Webb. And the November morning had been asserting itself for the full duration. She watched him get into the van. Watched the van sit still for a moment. She was half a block back, against the front of a dry cleaner that wasn't open yet, and she was asking herself a question she'd been asking with increasing frequency over the 3 months since he'd started working with her on the Zurich Protocol. The question was not complicated. It was, in fact, embarrassingly simple for a person who ran a company with 700 employees and had a board meeting in 2 hours and had navigated every professional complexity of the last decade with the analytical precision of someone who had been trained to see systems clearly. The question was just, who is this person, actually? And why do I keep thinking about him when I'm supposed to be thinking about other things? She'd started working with him in August. Tuesdays and Thursdays before 8, Saturdays at 7, the 3-morning-a-week protocol that the Zurich team had designed, and Marcus had been implementing with a methodical attentiveness that her actual medical team had found, variously impressive and slightly humbling. The protocol worked. This was the thing she'd been sitting with for 3 months, the thing she'd been careful not to say too quickly because she'd been disappointed by promising data before. But the Zurich team's weekly assessments were showing pathway activation at a rate that exceeded their median projection by a significant margin, and her own body was telling her things that she'd stopped listening for some time in year 6 of a decade of not listening for them. Small things. The transfer from her chair to the therapy surface that had required maximum resistance in week 1 and now required something different. something she was still calibrating the right word for. The reach sequence on Thursdays that had felt impossible in the first session and now felt like effort, genuine effort, but the effort of something that was working rather than the effort of something that wasn't. She wasn't telling the board yet. She wasn't telling anyone yet except the Zurich team and her personal physician, who had reviewed the assessments with the careful enthusiasm of a scientist who had been hoping for exactly this kind of data and was managing the hoping. She was, against her own intentions, thinking about telling Marcus. This was the source of the question. The telling Marcus impulse, which arrived at inconvenient moments and which she'd been attributing to the natural intimacy of the work. The sessions were physically and cognitively demanding. They required her to be honest about what she could and couldn't do in real time. And that kind of honesty with another person tended to create a particular quality of connection. She understood this intellectually. She'd been explaining it to herself intellectually for 6 weeks. The van was still sitting still. She watched it from half a block away and recognized, with the clarity she generally reserved for balance sheets and acquisition decisions, that she was standing outside in the cold at 6 in the morning watching a man sit in a van, and that this was information about something. She told herself she was following him because she wanted to understand his life outside the sessions, because the Zurich team had asked for contextual information about his approach, his background, his working style, and she thought seeing him in his element might be informative. These were not lies, exactly. They were the explanations she'd constructed around a simpler thing that she wasn't quite ready to name directly. The van's engine turned over. She watched it pull out of the lot. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment. Then, she did something she didn't usually do, which was make a decision based on something other than analysis. She walked to the lot, got into her own car, which her driver had left for her the previous evening because she'd told him she was keeping an unusual schedule and didn't need pickup, and she followed the van. Not closely. She wasn't following him for the sake of following him. She was following him because she'd started something, and the thing she'd started deserved, she felt, to be seen through to whatever it was going to show her. The van went across town in a direction that was not toward the residential addresses she'd have guessed. Went to a street she didn't know, and stopped outside a school. Not a school that was open yet. It was 6:40. And the building was dark except for the lights of what looked like a custodial crew through the ground floor windows. The van sat outside the school, and she pulled over a half-block back and watched. Nothing happened for 4 minutes. She thought he might be on his phone. Then, the side door of the school opened, and a small figure came out, moving fast, backpack bouncing. And Marcus got out of the van, and she saw the moment of it from a half-block away. The way the child launched herself at him, and the way he caught her and held her, his face over her shoulder, and something in the set of his posture changed entirely, became something different from the composed professional efficiency she'd been observing for 3 months. She understood she was looking at something private. This didn't feel like surveillance anymore. It felt like accidentally looking through a window into a room you hadn't known was there. She watched him carry the child back to the van. The child was saying something. She could tell by the movement, animated and apparently urgent, and he set her in the passenger seat and went around to the driver's side, and they drove away. She sat in her car on the dark street outside the school for a moment. The board meeting was in an hour and 15 minutes. She drove to her office building thinking about the posture shift, the way he'd changed when the child appeared. She'd seen him during the protocol sessions, which were demanding and sometimes difficult, and required him to respond to her capability, her limitations, her progress, and her frustration. She'd seen how he handled complexity, and how he handled resistance, and how he handled the sessions when she was having a harder day and needed more from the environment and less from him simultaneously. which was a paradoxical requirement that he managed by instinct rather than by asking what she needed, which was why it worked. She'd seen all of that. She hadn't seen the other thing until this morning. The board meeting went fine. She ran it the way she ran everything, with precision and full presence. And if something in the back of her mind was doing a different kind of work simultaneously, no one in the room was going to know it. At 2:15, she sent him a text. Not about the protocol. Just, "Can we talk briefly after Thursday's session?" His response came in 7 minutes, of course. She looked at the 2 words on her screen and thought about the 6 blocks she'd followed him through the Portland cold, and the moment at the van, and the child who had come out of the dark school building and launched herself without hesitation. Thursday morning arrived gray and committed to it. The sky the uniform white of a day that had decided not to be interesting about the weather. He was there at 7 precisely, which he always was, and she let him in and they worked through the session, and she was aware throughout it of the question she'd been carrying and of his complete unawareness of it, which was as it should be. The session was 40 minutes. The final sequence was the one the Zurich team called Stage 4, which she'd been unable to complete in its full form until 2 weeks ago, and which she moved through now with the concentrated effort of someone doing something genuinely difficult and genuinely possible, which was a combination she hadn't experienced in years and which she was still learning to be inside. When it was over, she sat in the chair and breathed, and he stood at the appropriate distance. The distance he always maintained, because he understood without being told that the moments after the session required space. "You want to talk?" he said. "I do." He sat. Not at the desk, on the low chair across the coffee table, the position that made the room equal rather than directional. She'd noticed he always chose that chair. "The Zurich assessment came in Tuesday," she said. "I saw the summary they copied me on. The activation rate," she said. "You understand what it means?" "I understand it's exceeding their projection," he said. "I don't understand everything it means clinically. It means the protocol is working at a level they didn't project for this stage." She said it plainly because she was a plain-speaking person, and because it deserved to be said plainly. "It means that the recalibration you did in week 3, the table distance, the reach angle, the sequencing of the morning tasks, was correct. More correct than the Zurich design." He was quiet for a moment. "I adjusted for what I saw, not for what the design said." "I know. That's why it worked." He looked at her steadily. "I want to tell you something," she said. "And I want to be honest about why I'm telling you, which I'll get to in a moment." He waited. "I followed you this morning," she said, "after your shift ended. I was outside the building at 5:50, and I followed you to the lot on Crane Street and then to the school on Alderton." He was very still, not the still of surprise, the still of someone absorbing information and deciding what to do with it. "Why?" he said. "I've been trying to answer that question all morning," she said. "The answer I can construct analytically is that I wanted to understand your working context better. The Zurich team asked for contextual information about your approach, and I wanted to see you in your actual environment. And the answer you can't construct analytically?" She looked at him. He was doing the thing he did, asking the real question, the specific question, the tape rather than the hard morning. "I've been thinking about you in contexts that aren't related to the protocol," she said, "and I've been attributing it to the intimacy of the work, which is a real factor and not the whole explanation." The room was quiet. Outside, Portland was continuing in its gray November way. "The child," he said. "Chloe, she came out of the school. You caught her. She stays with the before-school program when I work overnight," he said. "I pick her up after my shift. How long has she been doing that?" 8 months, since I started with Meridian." He paused. She doesn't love it, but she understands it. How do you explain it to her? The overnight work, the early mornings. Honestly, he said, in the version that's her size, that this is what the situation requires right now, and that I'm working toward the next version. He looked at his hands briefly. She's practical. She holds difficult information better than most adults I've worked with. Josephine thought about the posture shift, the way he'd changed at the school. What I saw this morning, she said carefully, when she came out of the building. What did you see? I saw who you are when you're not being professional, she said. I've been seeing who you are when you're being professional for 3 months, which is it's already a specific and unusual thing, what you bring to the work. But this morning was different. He was watching her with the quality of attention she'd come to know over 3 months. The full presence kind that wasn't waiting for her to finish so it could respond, but was actually taking in what she was saying, actually holding it. I'm the same person, he said. I know, she said. That's what I saw. The quiet between them had a different quality than the quiet during sessions. Those were working silences, purposeful. This was something else. Josephine, he said, and it was the first time he'd used her first name in 3 months. He'd called her Ms. Reeves without exception, with the professional consistency of someone who maintained forms, because forms were how you respected the structure of a situation. The shift was small and enormous simultaneously. Yes, she said. I'm a janitor who delivers produce 3 mornings a week, he said. I'm living in an apartment on Milner Street with a 7-year-old and a stuffed rabbit named Gerald. I have a master's degree and a CFA certification that I haven't been using to their potential, and I'm working on changing that, but right now, this morning I signed out of a janitorial shift and picked up my daughter from before school care, and that's the actual situation. I know, she said. I want to make sure you know, he said, because whatever you're describing, I want it to be based on the accurate information. I followed you through 6 blocks of Portland in the cold at 6 in the morning, she said. I think I have the accurate information. Something moved in his expression. Not a smile, exactly, something quieter and more considered. The protocol, he said. It can't be. It won't be affected, she said. I don't make decisions that compromise things that matter because of things that are personal. The work is separate. And this conversation is also something that matters, she said, which is why I'm having it directly rather than around the edges. He looked at her for a moment. She held his gaze in the way she held everything, steadily, without performing the steadiness. There's a coffee place on Clement Street, he said. I go there sometimes when Chloe's in school and I need a change of surface. I go on Thursday mornings after the session. Thursdays I'm usually at the office by 9, she said. Usually, he said. Not always, she said. Not always, he agreed. Outside, the November morning continued its gray and particular business. The session notes were on the table. The Zurich summary was on her laptop. The board meeting was behind her, and the next one was Monday, and between now and then, there were about 47 things that required her attention. She thought about the posture shift at the school, the child launching herself without hesitation and being caught. She thought about napkin drawings in a sock drawer and evidence, and the specific quality of a person who brought the same self to every room they entered. One thing, she said. He waited. The table in the first session, she said. When you moved it 8 inches instead of the 18 the Zurich team specified. How did you know? He looked at the coffee table between them, the one that was now positioned with an exactness she'd stopped noticing because it had become simply correct. The 18 would have put the challenge in the approach, he said. You'd have been compensating before you reached the actual work. 8 put it exactly at the work. He paused. It's what I look for in fraud cases, where the pressure is actually landing versus where it appears to be. You adjust for where it actually is. She looked at the table, at the precise position of it. 8 inches, she said. 8 inches, he said. She thought about that, about the specific quality of attention required to see the difference between 8 and 18, about the 8 months of before-school care and the compass rose napkin drawing and the 6 blocks in the Portland cold. Thursday, she said. After the session, he said. If you're not always at the office by 9, I'm not always, she said. He stood, picked up his bag, moved toward the door with the efficient economy of someone who understood when a thing had been completed and didn't require ornamentation. At the door he turned. Thank you for following me, he said. She looked at him, foreseeing it and then saying it directly, he said. Most people wouldn't. I don't find indirection useful, she said. I know, he said. That's one of the things. He went. She sat in the chair and listened to the elevator and then to the building doing its building things, its hums and cycles, and outside the gray November morning receiving the city. She opened the Zurich summary on her laptop. Read it again, the activation rates, the projections, the measured clinical language of people who were excited and were managing the excitement into data. She closed the laptop. She thought about 8 inches and how sometimes the smallest calibration was the one that changed everything, and how you had to be paying a specific kind of attention to find it, and how that kind of attention was not common and was not nothing. Thursday, she thought, after the session. She had work to do until then. She was good at work. She opened the laptop again and started on the board preparation for Monday and let the other things sit where it was sitting, patient and specific, the way things sat when they were real and didn't need to be rushed into a shape they hadn't found yet. Outside, Portland did what it did. Inside, she worked and thought about 8 inches and waited for Thursday in the way you waited for things that were actually worth waiting for.